Good day. Welcome to another episode of Eye on Election, where we're keeping a close eye on the Toronto mayoral by-election of 2023 and bringing you what we think are the best leadership ideas coming from our candidates. Today, we're going to meet with candidate Michael Lamoureux. I will give Michael the opportunity to introduce himself to you and give us some highlights on his platform. Welcome, Michael.
Well, thank you, Tony. It's a pleasure to be chatting with you today and have this opportunity to share my vision of Toronto with the people of Toronto. So my name is Michael Lamoureux. I've lived in Toronto since 1982, originally born and raised in Montreal. I am a finance professional by profession. I was able to retire 5 years ago, and so I've enjoyed that past 5 years, but I've continued to see what many of you have seen in the city of Toronto, and that's how it keeps deteriorating every year. And that's not just the last 5 years, but that's actually over the 40 years that I've been here. And so I'm sort of a solutions-oriented individual, and I care about my community. I don't want to just complain, and I don't want to just move out, as some people do. I want to stay here and fix the problems, or not just for myself, for my children who have the same struggles that your children do. And I think that that's really why I'm running. So my top priorities, I think, are pretty consistent with what most of the candidates have. And number one is housing affordability. That's by far the biggest problem, because it affects the most people. It affects virtually everybody, not just the 10,000 homeless or the 20 to 25% who are paying more than 30%, but it also even affects people who, yes, they may not be paying 30% of their rent, but they're still, more than 30%, but they're paying still $10,000 to $20,000 a year more than they should be, and they can't save. So yeah, they're okay, but they're not getting ahead the way people from my generation have been able to. Transit is another issue, as is traffic for those who drive, or those of us who drive occasionally, as well as people who just, like businesses. Businesses have to drive. They can't take TTC if you've got a contractor coming to your house, and that's just a huge productivity waster. Homelessness, again, needs to be addressed. It's a huge problem. Everybody talks about it, but I think I'm going to be the only candidate who says, you know what, because I believe I can find the funds to fund it, I will commit to spending the necessary funds to house them and treat them, people with mental addiction, as well as mental health conditions. There are some smaller issues, parks and recreation for those of us with children, or even if we're seniors, etc. The city never provides enough parks and rec programs for people, and again, it's a funding issue, and it really needs to be addressed. It kind of goes under the radar because it's not a crisis, but it still needs to be addressed if we want the quality of life in Toronto that I think we deserve. And then lastly, my 6 top priorities is, of course, we have to fund it all. As I said, I'm an accounting professional all my career in senior positions in multinational corporations. So I do believe I have the finance experience, as well as just the common sense. And having talked to people who work for the city, there's a lot of things that can be improved in terms of reducing costs in the city, as reprioritizing what our costs are. Everything, we want it all, but we can't have it all. We have to set clear priorities, and some things have to go. And I'm not shy about that. I think it would be misleading to the voters to say that I can pull magic money out of the air. I cannot. We are going to have to make some priorities. TTC, as I've already said, is a priority. I am not cutting anything that requires that provides direct service to the citizens and residents of Toronto, because that's what they need. But there is a lot of other costs and areas where I think money can be found. In addition, I do think there are a couple of areas where we can find funds, because I think the city tends to subsidize things that it shouldn't necessarily have to subsidize. Again, it is going to be contentious, because Nobody wants to pay more for a service such as parking, for example.
Right.
Or if I, we'll talk about this later, as you said, Tony, but
Yeah.
in order to fund free TTC, I am going to suggest a levy on across all households.
Let me interrupt you there, because that is one of the questions I have. We'll segue right into that particular question, the
Okay.
free TTC,
Yeah.
which I find intriguing. Are there any examples of free transportation on that level in working in a city like Toronto?
The two that I can think of off the top of my head, they're not quite as the same scale as Toronto, but I know that the capital of Estonia, Tallinn, and
Mhm.
has a program where they have free transit part of the day or part of the year. And I was just chatting with a fellow a week ago who was telling me about a program they have in Boulder, Colorado, where they also have a certain amount of. So they have an interesting program where they give every car owner a voucher for free transit. And apparently, I
Mhm.
haven't researched it myself, but they have had considerable success in diverting people from automobiles into public transit.
Public
So they're
transit.
not quite on the same scale
Right.
as what I think we're going to do here in Toronto. What I think the key is I don't really want to. I don't think it's fair to penalize people for driving. I don't want to take a overly punitive or demonize drivers. We all drive once in a
Mhm.
while, if not frequently, or we rely on people who have to drive. So
Right.
I want to do this in a positive way.
That leads me, what you're talking about, the fees, to my second question about the very same policy, is that your revenue strategy seems to rely heavily on tickets and traffic related fees, parking, etc., and taxes related to traffic. But if the strategy of using public transport is to reduce traffic, won't that also reduce your sources of revenue?
Yes.
To
Yep.
understand.
Let me give you the sort of total strategy, and then I'll talk about the three key funding elements. So the strategy in general is to encourage people to take transit. In other words, make the cost of transit very low relative to the cost of driving. And I don't believe in toll roads and that sort of thing. I think the easiest way to do that is make parking expensive. So I'm proposing
Right.
to increase parking fees across the city, and including permit parking, private parking lots, city parking lots, by about 50%. That can bring in about 300 million. And you're right. If people divert from driving and therefore parking, that will reduce the revenue. However, I'm leaving a wide margin in my other funding initiatives to provide for
Okay.
that, and not only
Right.
provide for uh, the fact that yes, I will have lower revenue from those streams. I'm actually hoping I have lower revenues from those streams. That's actually not necessarily a bad thing, because it means less cars on the road. And so my other two funding sources would be if we eventually, and again, I'm going to roll this out over 3 years. First,
Okay.
streetcars. Secondly, subways. Third, buses, because
Mhm.
uh, we can't just do it all at once, because we have no idea really much more uh, how many more people are going to take the service. So it's imperative that the service work well. So we'll have to phase it in, see what the demand is. We may have to increase the number of streetcars
Yeah.
uh, and buses. It's not a perfect system. I accept that.
Mhm.
There may be some difficulties, as you suggested. You're correct, but I think the overall
Mhm.
goal is still a good goal. And over the course of
Mhm.
3 years, and hopefully it won't
Mhm.
take more than that. But again, I don't know how many buses we may have to procure, things like that. Um,
Right.
but I'm hopeful
Well,
that
I'm
it will be worth. People will be patient, and will
right.
see the long run value in this proposal.
Yeah. Well, I think the premise is great. And I think Torontonians, the most Torontonians would welcome it if it's affordable. And I would rate it based on the fact that it's well thought out and you have a phased implementation plan. So I'd have to rate it high on the feasibility scale. I was attracted to that particular solution that you offered, as others. So
Thank you.
I want to move on to another one you had, your affordable housing recommendations. And I believe there were a combination of one, what you called rent vouchers, and another issue with respect to what I interpreted was RGI, rent geared to income, in that you mentioned paying a rental subsidy, but giving the money directly to the landlord as opposed to the tenant. So
Correct.
basically, I wanted you to elaborate on that a little bit,
Okay.
specifically on how you see the actual service delivery being rolled out.
I will just preface it with just an overall strategy here. I don't believe the city of Toronto should be a landlord. It should not own property. One of the main problems with that is that people are very restricted where they live. Community housing projects are not places people want to live. They're places people want to get out of. For example, at least the people I talk to, and even some non-for-profit and profit buildings are not really great places either. So I'm trying to give people, not only am I trying to help more people quickly, I'm also trying to give more people flexibility that the rest of us have in terms of where we live. So that's my overall goal. So again, I hate to say it, but I don't think the city runs things very well. And it costs a lot of money to build, and then where does that money come from? And the rent subsidies, more to your point, they're not actually completely new. There's a program I came across recently. So there's something called the Canada Ontario Rental Subsidy, and it is a limited program, so you have to be very specific in who qualifies. It is capped such that in terms of its annual funding, so that actually if you qualified and you wanted to apply right now, you couldn't. It's already full. And it only has a lifetime until 2029. But the concept is, if you meet the criteria, that they will pay you or your landlord, if you specified, I'm not quite sure how that works, the subsidy. And it comes out, they gave an example where it was $500, and it's Ontario wide. So the concept isn't completely new. And I looked at that, and I looked at, because I already had that idea, and I thought, well, that's a great program. Let's just, roll that out to more people, and so that people have flexibility to wherever they go. It gives people also an opportunity to move out of the city and potentially make more use of the subsidy in terms of what they get for what they're paying, right? And essentially everything ends up being geared to income in a way. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Did you have a question, Tony?
No, you just answered it.
Okay.
We were talking subsidy, and the question I had to you is, when we speak about affordability, isn't the solution more income than it is government subsidy? Isn't it that our wages are not aligned to the cost of living?
Well, because all right, you can from two angles. One is I can't afford. I don't have control over everybody's wages, so I can't regulate
We
that.
understand.
Secondly, I've been in Toronto 40 years, and when I first came here, things were vastly more affordable for people on the lower income scale. We had rooming houses. There weren't homeless people. There weren't. I don't recall ever in the early 1980s seeing homeless people, and so people had a easier time of it. I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm not saying everybody was middle income, but I'm saying for those people they were content or happy, and it wasn't nearly as much of an issue.
Is the root solution more subsidy over more equity with respect to wages or just changing the labor market?
I would still suggest that approaching it from reducing the cost of housing is probably better, because it reduces the whole infrastructure for everyone. So not only people at the lower end, but the people in the middle who are no longer able to save.
Two things never seem to go down: the price of gold and the price of real estate. And real estate and rent are inextricably linked.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
how can we realistically expect that in our time it's going to go down? It never has.
Okay. There have been dips in the real estate market. So we bought our first house in 1988. We moved to our present house in 1997, and the market stayed flat that whole time. In fact, there was a dip in the market in the 80s. But I would be fairly certain that rents didn't go up too much during that period of time.
But it's something I will might pay
So,
attention to.
so again, why? Because as you've seen from my website, my first overriding issue, which isn't one of my 6 priorities, but I'm saying it's the root cause of virtually all of Toronto's major problems, and that is the fact that we need to stop the population growth of the city of Toronto. And that's because we know. So what do people really, where do people really want to live? They want to live in a house, single family, detached kind of, or semi-detached kind of a building in as nice a neighborhood as they can, with nice amenities, and is convenient to wherever they have to travel, whether it be for work or anything else. So that's what people aspire to. And up to now, except for our children, we've all been mostly able to achieve that aspiration. It may take some time, but we've been able to achieve it. We can't achieve that anymore because basically there's far too much demand, i.e. people, for what we all have now, or what we all desire. And you can build more, you can continue to build more housing, but let's appreciate that, which is mostly going to be condos and apartments. But let's appreciate the fact that we've built over the last 40 years 400,000 new units, homes in the city of Toronto, and yet it's always gotten worse. So over the next 25 years, they're forecasting another 1 million people in Toronto, which will mean another 400,000 units. And is that going to make it better? Well, absolutely not. Well, you'd mentioned climate change there, and I will just point out that Toronto's carbon footprint keeps going up, and I do believe that's an issue that needs to be addressed. Well, if we didn't increase the size of our population, we wouldn't increase the size of our carbon footprint, and we wouldn't have to spend so much effort to try and reduce it back to what it was. So I'm basically taking the position that I don't want vertical or horizontal sprawl, because again, it still creates other problems. So if you have vertical sprawl, you will still have people driving, or people driving to you. Okay. So you will still increase the cars. You will still increase the carbon footprint and the heat island effect within the city. Growth, again, only population growth and having more income only fuels the inflationary effect on housing affordability.
How Correct. Do you justify that now? Because of our global position, Canada as a country in general, land mass, population wise, we have the space, and it is a very attractive destination for people seeking a better life. And of course, Toronto, one of the most attractive cities. And these people seeking a better life are becoming more and more. Of now, because we not just have the political refugee, we also have the victims of climate change disasters. We have the victims of war disasters and social unrest, all of whom are attracted to Canada as a destination. What your policy will definitely impact our views on immigration. How do we reconcile that now with the rest of the world who are depending on us to basically take in those in need?
Okay. Yeah. So first of all, you're right. Canada should decide as a country how much we want to grow. There is something that can be done in terms of diverting population growth out away from Toronto to other parts of Ontario, such as Ottawa or other cities. You know,
Okay.
as much as you say people want to come here, my experience is people are quite flexible and do live all across the country when they come to Canada. And as long as there's amenities and even if it's a small community for them, as long as it's welcoming and there is an opportunity for them, they're pretty flexible because, again, they don't necessarily want to come to live in a 40-story tower in Toronto. Some of them probably came from homes, not necessarily from towers. It's because it's
Yes.
where the services are. It's they have to come here. It's so again, I think there's more flexibility on that. But with respect to immigration, I think that's uh, I think that's reasonable to curtail our immigration levels. Again, I cannot control that, but if because again, I put my economic hat on in this, and I've been overseas, and I know that I know how difficult it is in some places, but I also know that a lot of people, it's strictly a matter of economics. And I'm thinking, well, it costs in some countries a tenth to live at the same level as it does here. So why not spend the money that I would otherwise spend here to help one person? Why don't we just spend the money and help 10 families
And
overseas?
okay,
That's an
right.
approach. I mean, the magnitude of the world's problems today are enormous. There's 8 billion people in the world. And I would say only 2 billion really live on an equivalent level as people in Canada, the United States, Europe, etc. So that's 6 billion people who would be advantaged if they could come out of their countries
Exactly.
here. And I'm thinking,
I don't think
I'm
we can hold that
able to
many.
help like such a small fraction. And again, I like one of the problems I have with this election is people are very satisfied with doing very little and thinking that they're really helping. And I have a problem
Yes.
with that. We've what helping 1% isn't okay with me. We got to do better than that.
Our time is running short. So I want to give you an opportunity in closing to again elaborate on the things that may be passionate to you and explain to the viewers of Toronto what is unique about your particular leadership or platform that will move us in the right direction. Floor is yours.
Okay. Yep. Uh, so I present myself as a problem solver to the residents of the city of Toronto. Some aspects of my platform are more sort of what people would call left, but then other parts of my platform are definitely more on the right side. And I think that I want people to not just take a sort of partisan left or right view of what needs to be done in the city of Toronto. I'm trying to present a balanced platform so that people will realize that yes, we're going to get a lot of value for this, but at the same time, nothing's free, and we're going to have to pay a little bit or more here and there in order to not just realize something that's best for us as individuals, but what's best for us as an entire city. And that is what I'm really passionate about. And that's why I present my platform the way I do. There's a lot of things I want to give to the city of Toronto, but at the same time, there are things I'm going to ask in return from the people of Toronto. And I'm hoping that they will recognize that and they will see the value of that and the long-term picture, not just for us, but as I said, for our children, because that's really the most important segment, and they can't vote yet. And so please look at my platform in that regard. It's michaellamoureux.ca. Simple.
MichaelLamoureux.ca. Well, great. Thank you so much for joining me today, Michael. It's been a real pleasure. And I wish you all the best in this campaign and your future campaigns.
Thank you, Tony. I've enjoyed this interview. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. For more information, on the critical issues that affect us all as global citizens, please visit our website, advocateforchange.com. And don't forget to subscribe and share.